Nigel, thanks a lot for joining us this morning. 73 MEPs are bidding their farewell, some saying it's a relief, others, though, citing the fact that actually they're quite sad to leave the EU. Let's talk about exactly what is the bittersweet moment the UK is currently facing.
Well, you're right. In the early hours of Saturday morning here in South Africa, Britain will leave the European Union. So it's the end of an era for us and the beginning of a new one. I think, obviously, it'll be very different. It'll feel very different for many of those working on European issues in the UK. But here in South Africa, I don't think it will feel all that different. I think you'll find that our values as a country are not suddenly going to change, and lots of key aspects of our international engagement are not going to change either. So on issues South Africa cares about, like nuclear proliferation or climate change or multilateralism and human rights, we will have a consistent approach. But what will change is our engagement in Africa. I think you saw last week with the Africa Investment Summit in London a real stepping up of our effort and our engagement, our investment in our relationships with the African continent, including with South Africa.
I mean, Nigel, we're talking here about bilateral relationships actually being strengthened as a result of that. Are we foreseeing that actually mutually beneficial relationships and outcome could possibly come out of a Brexit, one that was not necessarily enjoyed under the agreements of the EU?
Well, that's our ambition, to grow our relationships with partners like South Africa. Once we are no longer in the EU, we have already negotiated a standalone UK-only successor to our existing trade agreement with SACU, the Economic Partnership Agreement. That will be ready to kick in at the end of the transition period, during which we continue to be a member of EU agreements with third countries, which ends at the end of December this year. So at the end of that period, we will ensure there's no disruption to our trade, and we'll be able to look to ways to expand it in the future.
Very interesting sentiments coming out from various MEPs. For example, Jake Pugh saying that actually this has come to prove, and during his tenure, saying that actually he's come to realize that the EU has some serious issues and it's quite bureaucratic.
Well, look, there are lots of reasons why the British people voted by majority to leave the EU when we had our referendum in 2016. It's now our job to make the most of it, to make the most of the opportunities it presents. And certainly I feel that here in South Africa, where the government in the last few years has really upped its commitment in tangible ways to our engagement in Africa. So we've got over 400 extra staff coming into our network in our embassies around the continent. We're opening 5 new embassies, including here in Lesotho and Eswatini. We are upping our engagement on big issues like climate change, which you may know we're hosting the next big international conference in Glasgow in November. So I feel like I'm part of a reinvestment and a reinvigoration of our relationships with Africa and in South Africa in particular.
Let's talk a little bit about economic opportunities. I mean, when we're looking at what's happening globally, as well as the predictions of how various economies will fare, especially during this year, the stats are not necessarily very positive. I mean, some citing that even a less than 1% GDP growth in South Africa's case. So as a result of this Brexit, as we refocus energies in terms of a more united bilateral engagement, are we foreseeing quite viable and lucrative economic opportunities that manifest as a result of this?
I think one of the fundamentals which is clear for us as a country, the UK, is that whilst trade with our EU partners constitutes a large, significant minority of our international trade, the element with the rest of the world is growing all the time. Growing with Asian partners and growing with African partners, and we are excited about the potential, including through the African Continental Free Trade Area, to really drive up both outward investment from the UK and via the UK into African development, and trade between African countries as well as between the UK and African countries. So there's a lot of potential. I was just listening to President Ramaphosa talking about the importance of really making the ACFTA something that comes to life over the next few years. There's a lot of work that needs to go into that to make it real, but we are looking for ways in which we can support that process because we see it as mutually beneficial.
Nigel, we're going to leave it there for today.